Thank you. And thanks for having the opportunity to come and be here in Georgia with all of you. I first got interested in learning about what was happening in online learning when I was at the U.S. Department of Education as the Director of Educational Technology. In '05, I released the last National Ed Tech Plan, and the one area of all technology and education that I saw fundamentally holding the most promise for changing what students could access, how they could learn, how they could have access to the best teacher anytime, any place, were virtual schools and online learning. That whole market of opportunity is rapidly evolving. It's rapidly evolved over the last 10 years to include hybrid and blended models and ways that students can have a personalized and customized education like never before. That is here. It's happening all across the US, but the barriers that limit students' opportunities are very much grounded in policy barriers, which is why I spend so much of my time in state capitals all over the country. And so quickly in the US, what is exciting about this promise is that despite all of the hurdles, the number one barrier in policy is funding based on seat time. Seat time does not fit the way children learn, how children learn. If you look at other countries and the way they fund per pupil, but if you look at the definition of the Carnegie Unit from the Condition of Education Report in the US Department of Ed to the way it is in code in most states, it's assuming a minimum of 40 minutes per course over 180 calendar day. When you have students, the one thing we know about education is that kids learn at different rates, at different paces, that this idea that we have a single teacher with a single textbook in a single classroom with kids lined up in rows and they're limited in their opportunity to the resources and the kind of talent and the expertise that you are able to put in that space, when they look out the window and they see the way the rest of the world works, everybody is connected. People in blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs, connecting, collaborating, have access to a wealth of resources. So in the US, what's exciting is that now we see the growth of K through 12 online learning at 30% annually. That is huge. In states like Florida, where the funding follows the student down to the enrollment, this is true in Minnesota too. So it doesn't cost the state anymore, but the funding follows the student. Actually, Florida Virtual Schools funded, as Bob mentioned, Governor Weiss, only for successful completion. It is a public education funding model on performance down to the course level. So those courses are funded at the same per pupil rate minus 11% because they're taking out space and transportation costs. The biggest costs in online education are teachers and people who run the programs and the increased cost of the technology. So online learning is growing at 30% annually in the US. How many states have state virtual schools? Today, that number has grown from just 8 back in 2004 to 28 states. Georgia is one of them. There are big waiting lists for courses from the Georgia Virtual School because that is funded based on policy with an appropriation rather than having the funding follow the student. If you had the funding follow the student like it does in Florida or Minnesota, you could scale that. That's something very important to keep in mind. So you have 28 states with state virtual schools. You have 27 states with full-time virtual opportunities. In all 50 states, there are blended learning and online learning opportunities happening. So a quick snapshot of the US, but let's take a look at what's happening across the globe. So in the US, we have now gone from, in 2000, about 50,000 student enrollments in K through 12 online learning to over 2 million online course enrollments, and that number is closer to 4 million when you look at blended and hybrid models like the types that we see starting to emerge. Overseas, I'm just going to start with the UK. How many people are familiar with the international baccalaureate programs offered around the world? The IB started a diploma program online 3 years ago where they took their curriculum, rigorous curriculum, they moved into what we call gold standard, high quality online course development, high quality digital lessons, They trained their best teachers to teach online. They started this working across 26 different countries. Today, they're in 125 different countries with the IB diploma program online. So when I go around the country, I say to all of you in your districts, does every kid have access to a high-quality IB program? Because you can make that so with online learning. If you go from England and you go, let's say, to Turkey, 3 years ago, they had 0 students enrolled in online courses. Through a public-private partnership with the government, they developed high-quality online courses that are taught by high-quality teachers, high-quality faculty, trained to teach online. They went in the first year to reach how many students with online courses? 0 to 5 million. In 3 years now, they're reaching 15 million of 16 million kids. There is a big lesson here. In India, they have a goal in 10 years to provide universal access to K-12 education. How many more schools would they have to build? 200,000. 70% of those schools would be in rural areas. Guess what? They don't have the money to do that. They also have shortages of highly qualified teachers. So what are they doing? A public-private partnership where they brought in EduComp, a company to develop world-class, internationally benchmarked digital curriculum, and then what? Train their best teachers to teach online, and then make access in community centers, libraries, wherever they can get it. This model that EduComp is developing is low-cost buildings or structures where the kids can come in and access this online learning, and their goal, again, is to scale up to have universal access. The last example I'll use, South Korea has a national virtual school. This is happening all over the world. China has a goal in the next 10 years to reach how many more students with online learning? 100 million. 100 million. China has, how many kids do we have in the US total in K through 12? Yeah, 55 million. China has 60 million kids that they classify as gifted. We can't afford to have a third of our kids drop out of high school and a third of our kids go into college and need remediation and then drop out and only graduate a third of our kids from college. We're in this work of a thirds with the 55 million that we start off with. We need to ensure that every single student has an education that is customized to them. So hopefully that gives you a picture of what's happening around the US. It's great that Georgia has the policy to have full-time virtual schools, although the funding level is so wildly off. So wildly off. If you're funding regular education at $8,900 a student, I'm not sure I have the exact number right, we're seeing the national average for funding full-time virtual schools at $6,500 a student. That's good news. There's a cost savings there, but you're wildly off at the number that you're at now. That needs to be addressed. And number two, you really need to address on the state virtual programs or the programs where the money follows the student down to the enrollment so you can achieve those cost savings and open up access.
Susan, one quick question for the audience. What country would you say we should benchmark ourselves to currently in terms of their online learning policy?
Well, it's interesting. Right now, you're going to see, they're not there yet, but we've got 30 people coming to our conference next week from Australia. They're doing a laptop for every student in grades 9 through 12. They have digitized their entire curriculum, and they're working to do so every student has access. They're fundamentally changing it. If we had to benchmark against anyone, it's hard to do this because Singapore is a small country, right? And they're very tightly controlled. Singapore has online learning and blended learning in 100% of their schools. 100% of their teachers and their teacher training programs, when they come out, know how to use online learning. And they hold e-learning week once 1 week every year, where they physically shut schools down and ensure that learning can happen anytime, any place. So the students know how to do it, the teachers know how to do it. Why do they do this? Remember H1N1? What happened in the US? A couple people got sick, right? And we shut schools down completely for 5 days, completely losing that productivity. What did they do in Singapore and in Hong Kong and in many countries in Asia? They used their digital resources that they already had. They already had access to the devices, and they continued learning for everybody else in the school, and if they had to shut schools down, those who were healthy could continue to learn. It's a disaster recovery. What could we have done with Katrina if everybody had been using blended and hybrid and online learning? All of those teachers and all of those students that were dispersed could have continued in the process. So Singapore is definitely at the top of the list for having online learning in all of their schools and those opportunities.